To the High Council, 50 million human souls were not a tragedy. They were just a rounding error in a spreadsheet. They watched acid rain strip the flesh from our children and saw nothing but cost efficiency. They wrote us off as biological waste just to save a few credits. They were certain we would vanish quietly into the dark. But the galaxy's smartest logicians made one fatal mistake. They forgot what happens when you back a desperate species into a corner. Metallic hums thrummed through the observation deck, vibrating against the soles of the counselors' boots as distant stars flickered like trembling candle flames in the infinite black. The air carried a faint tang of ozone and burnt circuits, mingling with the cold sterility of recycled oxygen. Screens glowed with pale light, painting angular shadows across faces unmoved, unshaken, untouched by compassion. Charts of collapsing colonies pulsed in calculated sequences, each system a graph, a metric, a line of numbers denoting losses, inefficiencies, and net profit. Human worlds at the rim glimmered faintly, ragged sparks against a void that stretched beyond comprehension, and every sensor confirmed what reason demanded. They were draining everything, producing nothing of value, and bleeding the galaxy dry. The Council, vast in authority and glacial in thought, shifted their attention from one chart to another, the low hum of machinery filling the gaps where empathy might have lingered. Their eyes, lenses refracting cold light, recorded energy outputs, population decline, supply deficits. A human colony on a dust-choked planet with red winds whipping like molten knives across broken plains registered as a mere fraction of efficiency lost. A world of oceans whose waters boiled with acidic storms weighed as a blip of negative net yield. Every detail was cataloged, weighed, and dismissed. Nothing escaped their scrutiny, yet nothing stirred their conscience. Logic was the only currency, and in its terms humanity had failed. In the year 2154, the final projections aligned. Withdrawal schedules were drafted, spanning centuries measured in galactic standard years, precise to the rotation of sector clocks and orbital decays. Drones prepared to evacuate critical infrastructure, supply lines were to be rerouted, entire populations were to be abandoned without hesitation. The decision had already crystallized before it was pronounced. The hum of computation merged with the sigh of recycled air, and for a brief moment the deck seemed to inhale the stillness of inevitability. Not one council member questioned the cold arithmetic, nor did a single voice murmur lament. The room was a cathedral of detachment, where the faint smell of metal and ionized air replaced incense, and the silence carried more weight than any speech could muster. From high orbit above Sector 7, human settlements glimmered against the abyss, fractal clusters of light and shadow, tenuous and fragile as fireflies caught in a gale. Cities sprawled unevenly across cratered plains and oceans of ice, monuments to tenacity and improvisation that no algorithm could appreciate. Each spark hinted at lives lived in defiance of logic, children learning to read under flickering solar panels, elders crafting stories to preserve memory, farmers coaxing crops from infertile soil with hands blistered and raw. The scale of the cosmos pressed against them with indifferent gravity, yet they clung to existence with an unquantifiable stubbornness. The Council regarded these faint glimmers and saw only numbers, inefficiencies, and deficits. The final order was recorded, mechanical and absolute. The hum of machines accelerated, ready to purge, ready to reclaim. Abandonment was unanimous. The human worlds, so small, so fragile, so laughably unprofitable, were marked for erasure. Yet within their ragged lights burned something the Council could not measure, a pulse, a spark of life that defied calculation, a stubborn refusal to vanish quietly into the infinite dark. Engines whispered through the void, a metallic susurration threading between the frozen light of distant suns. The scent of ionized plasma and heated alloys clung to the hulls of the Imperial fleet, a faint acrid tang that no human nose would recognize, but that permeated every corridor with oppressive inevitability. Fleets assembled like shadows stretching across Sector 7, their formation precise as a lattice of glass, each vessel a cold instrument of calculation. Automated harvesters spun through asteroid belts with surgical grace, supply drones drifted along trade lanes like specters, and bureaucratic enforcement vessels traced invisible grids around human colonies, recording every structure, every sign of life, every faint glimmer of resistance. The galaxy's grand engines hummed with an almost musical detachment, resonant frequencies that vibrated through the bone of every observing alien strategist, a lullaby of efficiency meant to soothe nerves, yet carrying in its cadence the certainty of eradication. In the year 2154, the fleets moved without hesitation. Light refracted off polished hulls, scattering across nebula clouds and casting alien observers into stark relief, emphasizing their sharp angles, their gleaming panels, their mechanical detachment. No turbulence disturbed them. No micrometeor or solar flare could displace their trajectory. They were a flowing algorithm made real, executing centuries of strategy in a matter of galactic rotations. Alien tacticians monitored displays, eyes clicking with lenses that recorded energy readings, population densities, and projected collapses. They marveled at the precision, at the absence of chaos, at the predictability of these fragile human outposts. Everything in the galaxy that required order bent to their calculations. Humans, they assumed, would obey, surrender, scatter like starlight through the void. 50 million souls were expected to vanish quietly into history's ledger, leaving no trace beyond the faint hum of abandoned generators. Observation drones skimmed low over cragged planets, their sensors cold and unblinking. On one world, dust storms roared across broken plains, whipping sand into crystalline needles, yet the drones recorded metrics rather than suffering. On another, oceans boiled in acid storms, and automated harvesters swept their nets to extract resources, as though the heat and noxious fumes were merely variables in an equation. Alien eyes saw nothing remarkable, no civilization capable of self-sustenance, no technology beyond the prescribed charts. Humans were inefficiency personified. The strategists noted the faint signals of communication, the flickering lights of colonies, and cataloged them in the margins of reports, insignificant, negligible, a statistical anomaly to be corrected. Yet the humans remained. In settlements of rock and ash, in cities half buried by sand and wind, life persisted. Children slept in rooms warmed by solar panels patched together from scavenged hulls. Elders told stories of Earth, their voices trembling but unbroken, while fingers traced constellations mapped in memory. Farmers coaxed green shoots from infertile soil, blistered hands nurturing seedlings that should have withered under alien expectations. A baker kneaded dough on a floor that shivered under freezing winds, filling a shelter with the scent of warmth and yeast, defying the calculated decay predicted by every imperial algorithm. Traders, scientists, and healers worked without supply chains, crafting medicines from native herbs and repurposed tech, their improvisation a quiet rebellion that no censor could anticipate. Life clung stubbornly, irrationally, beautifully. Imperial strategists observed through arrays of magnified lenses, noting the lack of panic, the absence of surrender. They expected chaos, disarray, rebellion, or collapse. Instead, they recorded order without conformity, resistance without weapons, perseverance without logic. Automated harvesters and bureaucratic drones could not account for resilience, nor could any schedule accommodate stubborn hope. The fleets passed over the human worlds like cold shadows, yet could not extinguish the warmth that pulsed in scattered homes, in hands held over fires, in eyes reflecting starlight with defiant clarity. Every orbital pass became a testament to the alien misjudgment. A dust-choked village held a school, children singing songs that carried through storm winds. On a frozen tundra, a single light shone from a research lab, and its glow reached the blackness of space as if to mock the calculations of efficiency. One human, barely 30 standard years old, stood at the edge of a cliff, hands gripping rough stone, and watched the Imperial fleet slide past, a silent river of steel and reason, feeling neither fear nor surrender. He shivered not from cold but from understanding. They had expected his extinction, and yet here he stood, alive, breathing, defying inevitability. The fleets recorded metrics, issued status reports, and continued their course. Alien logicians marveled at human stubbornness, cataloged it as anomaly, then ignored it, believing it would collapse under time and attrition. They could not imagine a species so irrationally cohesive, so resistant to statistical erasure. Yet the humans endured. Every colony, every settlement, every life persisted against the indifferent logic of galactic law, a pulse of vitality in the void. The silence of space, once assumed to be emptiness, carried a faint vibration of human resolve, an imperceptible but undeniable signal of defiance that no automated harvester could erase, no bureaucratic vessel could suppress, and no strategist could predict. The imperial fleets moved on, leaving behind shadows and scanned records, believing the work complete, confident in the absence of rebellion. And yet, in the hushed winds of dust-choked planets, in the boiling acid storms, in frozen valleys and fire-lit villages, life persisted. Humanity, irrational, fragile, persistent, burned faintly against the void. 50 million souls, scattered and nearly erased, survived in defiance of certainty, proof that the galaxy's calculations could not measure courage, hope, or the stubborn will to endure. And nothing in the cold engines of the galaxy, nothing in the meticulous algorithms of the Imperial fleet, could prepare the universe for the storm that Pulse would one day become. Wind tore across the barren plains with a relentless, shrieking force, whipping grit against the faces of humans who moved like stubborn shadows over the scarred surface. The scent of scorched earth and metallic dust filled the air, clinging to hair and skin, mingling with the acrid tang of chemical runoff from abandoned harvesters. Waves of methane hissed across boiling oceans, sending corrosive steam into settlements half erased by dust storms. Yet lights still flickered behind makeshift walls, illuminating figures bent over work tables, hammering and soldering scraps into machines that defied expectation. They dismantled the very vessels and drones meant to retrieve them, grinding gears and circuits into windmills that spun with pale glimmers of power, biolabs that shimmered with synthetic luminescence, and libraries whose shelves carried the weight of memory heavier than any log of the Imperial fleet. The sound of saws cutting metal, the rhythm of welding arcs, and the low hum of improvised turbines created a symphony of defiance against the emptiness pressing from above. In the year 2154, 50 million souls spread across Sector 7 endured what alien observers had deemed impossible. Without trade, without external aid, humans cultivated life in soils pronounced infertile, coaxing greenery from ash and stone. Water was reclaimed from poisoned rivers, filtered through scavenged membranes and melted ice, while green shoots trembled under acid rain, yet survived. Storms that should have torn structures into splinters were harnessed as energy, funneled through wind turbines fashioned from hull plating, their motion vibrating with the heartbeat of ingenuity. Children ran across cracked plazas, their laughter cutting through the low, constant roar of wind and engine hum, voices layering over the silence left by abandoned fleets. They learned histories from grandparents whose hands traced Earth's long-forgotten continents, whose eyes reflected a stubborn conviction. Survival was the first victory, but understanding and legacy were the next. Settlements wove together like living networks, communication lines strung from scavenged cables, faint radio pulses carrying news of weather, crop yields, and mechanical failures across desolate distances. Humans traded labor and knowledge, barter of ingenuity, replacing currency of the galaxy. Makeshift bridges of steel and rope spanned canyons. Greenhouses glowed with phosphorescent light, feeding the next generation while storm winds rattled their panels like ancient percussion. Where aliens expected collapse, they found meticulous schedules of survival. Where reason predicted despair, they found audacious hope. Every door bolted against gale, every repaired roof, every hearth tended against freezing nights, told a story of relentless will, a language of persistence that no censor could quantify. Children ran barefoot over volcanic sands, their toes blistered, their laughter piercing the howl of sulfur winds, learning physics by trial and error, remembering stories of Earth as though the knowledge was a weapon against annihilation. Elders traced constellations in the ash-choked sky, telling of planets where humans first dared to leave, hands shaking from age yet strong in memory. Each night, under alien moons that had never seen life like this, humans gathered around fires, whispering strategies for survival, sharing recipes of crops that grew where no soil should nourish them, singing songs that vibrated through the bones, that told of hope in a galaxy indifferent to their existence. The machinery that once symbolized their removal became instruments of creation. Harvesters converted into irrigation pumps, drones reprogrammed to skin soil and weather patterns, metal plates melted into solar collectors glinting under acid rain. Libraries filled with journals, sketches, and maps that recorded both planetary features and human stories. Records no algorithm could interpret, chronicles that carried the pulse of life. Each community became a node in a human network, resilient, adaptable, alive, and unlike anything the galaxy had predicted. The echo of hammers, the hiss of molten metal, the whisper of wind through turbines, merged into a rhythm that defined existence itself, defiant against entropy. Even as alien strategists assumed surrender, humans did not flinch. They built shelters atop shifting sands, tapped geothermal vents to power forges, and harvested storm winds that should have torn them apart. 50 million souls, dispersed and imperiled, became architects of improbable cities, gardeners of barren worlds, storytellers of survival. The imperceptible heartbeat of humanity pulsed across Sector 7, defying logic, refusing erasure, and inscribing a lesson in every scaffold, every footprint, every glowing window. The galaxy might calculate efficiency, predict collapse, and decree irrelevance, but it could not measure courage, persistence, or the unyielding spark of life that thrived where no hope should exist. The storms raged, oceans hissed, dust devoured plains, and yet humans endured. They did not merely exist. They shaped the elements, transformed ruin into shelter, scarcity into sustenance, and despair into song. Every wind-battered settlement, every flickering biolab, every child learning under the gaze of a starless sky, was proof that life, stubborn and irrational, could flourish even at the edge of galactic neglect. In Sector 7, amidst acid oceans and endless storms, humanity remained unbroken, weaving a tapestry of survival so intricate, so alive, that the cold calculations of empires could not anticipate, could not erase, and would one day tremble before its quiet, unstoppable brilliance. A low hum rattled through the alien cruisers as they drifted into orbit, the faint scent of ozone and heated alloys lingering in compartments where no life moved but for instruments and monitors. Beams of scanning light cut through swirling dust clouds, illuminating human settlements that clung to barren plains, oceans of acid, and jagged canyons like fragile diodes in an endless night. The metallic tang of overworked circuits mixed with the distant, faint aroma of burning fuel from repurposed engines below, yet the humans persisted, visible only as tiny flickers of light through the storms. The ship's sensors recorded impossible geometry, structures suspended by principles alien engineers could not calculate, towers spiraling without visible support, energy grids humming with frequencies unlisted in any database, lights shifting as if alive. Alien scholars leaned over displays, articulating confusion in clicks and hums, the very sound vibrating through metal decks like a warning pulse. In the year 2154, 50 million souls scattered across Sector 7 had become something neither calculation nor command had anticipated. Abandoned factories, stripped of imperial machinery, were now cultural sanctuaries. Music leaked through open corridors, faint vibrations carried across orbital scans, the notes defying harmonic rules known to alien acoustics. Theater performances used crude holograms, shadows of humans dancing across dust-choked stages, improvising sets with weathered scrap, yet the effect was mesmerizing, as if mocking the cold emptiness of space around them. Recordings of stories, songs, and debates pulsed along makeshift networks, crossing deserts, oceans, and craters, reaching other settlements where humans gathered, eyes bright, listening, learning, responding, expanding. The aliens cataloged all, noting data streams and structural anomalies, but found no explanation in logic or efficiency for this thriving absurdity. Humans did not seek expansion. They did not manufacture exports, nor did they accumulate credits that could sway trade lanes. They built beauty from rubble, conversation from scarcity, debate from hunger, and laughter from loss. Children ran along wind-battered roofs, balancing like dancers on beams. Their laughter carried in bursts of cold wind that reached orbital sensors, registering as anomalies in the readings. Scholars, elders, and laborers alike worked with hands blistered by wind, acid, or metal, weaving networks of knowledge that required no algorithm. Every note struck on a makeshift piano, every sentence written in scavenged journals, every act of creation became proof of a species impervious to the indifference of space. Alien observers cataloged structures, grids, and energy flows, noting the efficiency or apparent lack thereof, but could not record the pulse of human ingenuity, the unquantifiable warmth of shared effort against isolation, the stubborn, irrational insistence on joy and meaning. On a plateau scorched by acid rain, a group of humans painted murals on the walls of an abandoned factory, vivid colors smeared over rust and dust, depicting stars and oceans they had never seen, worlds they had left behind, and the faint memory of Earth. Wind gusted through the half-destroyed building, carrying the scent of wet clay and burnt metal into the air, mixing with distant hums of generators and the faint aroma of cooking fires. Alien sensors registered thermal signatures of small figures moving with meticulous care, yet could not perceive the intent behind the strokes. The stories whispered to children crouched among debris, the subtle laughter shared over splintered boards. What logic might have labeled inefficiency, chaos, or vulnerability, humans had transformed into expression, persistence, and culture. Orbital grids pulsed, recording energy signatures humming with precision alien engineers could not interpret, and the data streams reflected anomalies in architecture, agriculture, and social coordination. Scholars aboard cruisers noted irrational cohesion, a term that vibrated uneasily in mechanical translators. The humans were bound neither by orders nor by treaties, yet functioned as networks of intelligence, culture, and resilience. Every settlement radiated the same quiet energy, cooperation, improvisation, and the audacity to create in defiance of expectation. Alien tacticians assumed they had prepared for all variables, yet here was a species that neither surrendered nor followed prescribed paths, whose survival and artistry transcended calculation. The sun glinted off wind turbines crafted from hull plates and solar panels welded from scrap, turning storm energy into the faint hum of light and heat. Music drifted through alleyways and plazas, voices raised in song that carried across miles of dust and stone into orbital sensors, registering as anomalies, but carrying meaning the machines could not decode. Children balanced on scaffolding, elders tending gardens of impossibly green plants, technicians rewiring energy grids mid-storm, and every act, mundane and monumental, was stitched into a tapestry of resilience. Humans created not for profit or survival alone, but for beauty, for conversation, for joy, and for the legacy of 50 million souls whose existence had been written off. Alien scholars recorded anomalies, projected models, and debated probabilities, yet no equation could explain the vibrancy, no algorithm could capture the pulse of laughter, argument, and song that reverberated across planets once abandoned. The humans had transformed loss into art, scarcity into networks, and despair into persistence, forging something untouchable. Space, once empty and indifferent, now carried the faint vibration of human presence, and it radiated outward from barren plains, acid oceans, and wind-battered settlements, challenging the cold logic of empires and whispering a truth no calculation could erase. Survival was only the first step, creation the next, and the galaxy had underestimated the depth of human will. Glass and metal groaned under the weight of centuries as explorers stepped onto the once-forgotten plains, the acrid tang of scorched stone and recycled air filling their sensors. Winds rattled skeletal towers and shattered domes, carrying a faint, sweet scent of cultivated gardens and wood fires that no automated system could parse. In the year 2154, 50 million souls had long since woven themselves into the bones of Sector 7, and what the galaxy had deemed inefficiency now pulsed with vitality. Steps echoed across plazas vast enough to rival cathedral naves, the soles of boots clattering against patterned stone that bore centuries of human feet. Humans moved among these spaces with a grace that seemed to mock the calculations of empire, students tracing glyphs in libraries that stretched endlessly, artisans painting murals that reflected storms, oceans, and memories of distant Earth, musicians striking chords that resonated in frequencies alien sensors could not fully capture. Whispers of human achievement traveled along trade routes for decades, carried by explorers, merchants, and drifting freighters, dismissed at first as exaggeration, myth, or clever fabrication. Yet when the fleets arrived, when curious observers finally descended into the cities, the scale of creation struck with undeniable force. Theaters larger than any cathedral in the galaxy stretched across hills and valleys, their stages illuminated by fires and bioluminescent panels, their acoustics capturing voices and instruments that bounced and multiplied in perfect harmony. Universities flourished in abandoned industrial shells, where classrooms glimmered under strange lights and scholars debated physics, philosophy, and the arts, weaving together knowledge not for profit, but for the act of understanding itself. Laboratories hummed with energy drawn from storms and molten cores, incubating experiments that could have defied the calculations of any interstellar engineer. The scent of parchment, ink, and faint ozone from experimental devices mingled, creating a perfume of civilization alive, stubborn, and wholly human. Merchants from the profitable sectors found themselves drawn not by currency, but by resonance. Their ships docked alongside human harbors, hulls scraping against weathered piers, engines muttering in the night, while they inhaled the warmth of crowded plazas, the smell of roasting grains and fermented fruit, and the hum of conversation that had no agenda beyond creation. Scholars followed, eyes wide, hands trembling, as they traced the murals, touched the books, and listened to music that moved in rhythms impossible to predict. Here, the humans had created something untouchable, a civilization measured not in trade, not in exports or efficiency, but in ideas, expression, and the stubborn insistence that life could be extraordinary even where none had expected it. Art captured emotions alien species could imitate but never truly feel. Performance created empathy that no algorithm could quantify. Debate and discourse forged networks of thought that pulsed like electrical grids across barren planets. The council, seated in distant chambers of cold light and reflective steel, monitored transmissions with growing unease. They had decreed irrelevance, had written off these human worlds as losses, and yet now the data streamed back showing beauty, creativity, and culture proliferating across the rim. Every signal, every pulse of energy from windmills, every echo from a theater, and every flicker of illumination carried proof that humans were no longer drains on resources. They were hubs of influence, redefining power not through commerce, but through inspiration. Sensor readings could record frequency and amplitude, temperature and material integrity, but the pulse of hope, joy, and defiance could not be captured in any metric. Alien advisors leaned closer to consoles, their cold calculations faltering as human culture defied all known principles. Children ran across sun-baked plazas, barefoot and laughing, carrying scrolls and musical instruments. Elders traced constellations on the edges of gardens, hands worn but precise, teaching the next generation of humans to map both stars and stories. Kitchens filled with the aroma of fermented grains and roasted roots, markets overflowed with crafts and writings, and in every corner, humans conversed, debated, performed, and celebrated life as though it were both fragile and eternal. Wind turbines hummed with captured storms, small engines whirred with power harvested from molten rock, and the light of countless fires illuminated faces that were stubbornly, defiantly alive. Explorers recorded every motion, yet found no threat, no ambition to conquer, no currency-driven scheme, only beauty, persistence, and the audacity to exist fully in a galaxy that had already declared them gone. The architectural marvels were staggering, bridges of alloy and glass that spanned ravines scarred by centuries of erosion, towers twisting toward alien suns as though to greet them, and terraces where gardens thrived on soils previously deemed barren. Music and theater spilled into open streets, audible even from orbital sensors, creating a resonance that defied the cold calculations of efficiency. Libraries glowed with phosphorescent ink, classrooms hummed with ideas, and laboratories pulsed with experiments that tested the very nature of physics and biology. Humans had transformed isolation into opportunity, scarcity into innovation, and neglect into cultural dominance. Where the galaxy had once predicted extinction, it found influence. Where logic had expected quiet decay, it discovered vibrancy. 50 million souls, abandoned and derided, had transformed their worlds into centers of thought and wonder. Alien observers, merchants, and scholars alike trembled before the scale and audacity of human persistence. The pulse of humanity radiated outward, touching trade routes, academic forums, and even the distant halls of the council. It was no longer a presence measured in resource consumption or exports. It was a heartbeat, a force of creation, impossible to ignore, impossible to erase. The abandoned worlds had become untouchable, living proof that life, culture, and audacity could transcend neglect, calculation, and the indifferent vastness of the cosmos, and the galaxy, for all its machines and logic, had no choice but to witness the triumph of humanity. The sky trembled with the low hum of orbital traffic, light flaring across the thin atmosphere of human worlds that once cowered beneath storms and neglect. Winds carried the scents of wet soil, roasting grains, and resin from crafted structures, mingling with the metallic tang of machinery turned to art, a perfume of civilization forged in defiance. In the year 2154, 50 million souls had become the heartbeat of Sector 7, and the galaxy could feel it, even from the coldest reaches of its distant quadrants. Children sprinted across plazas, their laughter weaving into the hum of turbines and the low resonance of libraries and theaters, each footfall striking like a drumbeat that resonated through stone, soil, and the very energy grids that powered this improbable civilization. The streets vibrated with conversation, debate, and song, a human frequency that no calculation, no algorithm, no empire could anticipate or contain. Ships from alien races arrived cautiously, scanners probing and cataloging, yet registering something beyond comprehension. The air shimmered with the heat of engines and the subtle scent of cultivated gardens, every movement of humans observed, every brushstroke, every spark of creative effort recorded. Towers rose where barren plains had once stretched empty, twisting toward suns with an elegance that mocked structural logic. Bridges of alloy and glass arched over canyons, gardens flourished in soils labeled infertile, and windmills turned with a rhythm that carried energy, hope, and stubbornness across continents. Explorers stepped onto terraces, inhaling the scent of fires and wet stone, tracing glyphs and murals that told histories of Earth, of exile, of endurance, and of audacity, and felt themselves humbled by the scale and depth of what they had dismissed as lost worlds. Humanity did not radiate influence through credits or fleets, nor did it seek conquest or domination. Civilization flowed from these worlds as if drawn from the pulse of life itself, through art, debate, music, and the intricate networks of memory and care built over generations. Libraries glimmered with phosphorescent ink, theaters echoed with voices and instruments that carried across entire planets, and universities taught lessons of science, ethics, and philosophy, with a devotion that transformed learning into ritual. The scent of ink, warm stone, and fermenting food mingled with the hum of energy grids and the faint tang of ozone from experiments in atmospheric manipulation, creating a tapestry of sensory proof that life had triumphed over neglect. Each human act, planting a garden, writing a story, conducting an orchestra in the rain, radiated resilience, empathy, and audacity, the pulse of existence beating stronger than any empire's metrics. Observers noted patterns they could not explain. The coherence of communities without central command, the proliferation of culture in worlds that were once derided as unprofitable, the sheer stubbornness of 50 million souls to exist fully and beautifully where logic predicted erasure. Music drifted across valleys and into the skies, carrying rhythms that sensors translated but could not interpret. Debates in university halls echoed into orbital sensors, registering anomalies that defied prediction. Alien engineers, strategists, and scholars felt the disquieting weight of presence, the kind of force that no fleet, no algorithm, no ledger could quantify. Humans were alive in a way that reshaped space itself. Their cities, gardens, and monuments pulsed with a vitality that made observers pause, rethink, and quietly imitate. Children ran along rooftops glittering with rainwater and bioluminescent panels, tracing constellations taught by elders who remembered Earth's skies. Fires burned in plazas as humans celebrated creation itself, improvising music and storytelling that rose and fell with the wind. Wind turbines captured storms, powering forges, laboratories, and libraries, their hum synchronized with the heartbeat of communities. Every step of a laborer, every note of a song, every discussion over a communal meal was a proof of existence and a challenge to the galaxy's cold calculations. Trade routes once indifferent now pulsed with travelers seeking knowledge, inspiration, and the human touch, yet finding no commodifiable goods. Only brilliance, creativity, and the undiminished force of life lived without compromise. The council, watching from distant chambers of polished steel and light, could only register astonishment. Worlds declared irrelevant, inefficiency incarnate, now radiated influence that could not be measured in credits, cargo, or output. Civilization had emerged where none was expected, a civilization built not by command or calculation, but by stubborn will, compassion, and imagination. Alien fleets, scholars, and merchants arrived in awe, their sensors unable to quantify laughter, empathy, and the moral courage that had built theaters, universities, and gardens in the void. Humanity had endured famine, storms, and isolation, yet its presence had expanded not through force but through creation. The pulse of life, of culture, and of audacity spread outward, touching trade lanes, orbital stations, and distant colonies, a rhythm that no algorithm could capture. Where once the galaxy had seen inefficiency, it now found inspiration. The humans had bent reality itself, transforming barren plains into thriving cities, neglect into culture, and abandonment into a force that no empire could ignore. Civilization flowed from their worlds as a current of thought, creativity, and compassion, spreading influence without conquest, wealth without calculation, and joy without need for approval. Fires glowed in plazas, voices carried over hills, and music echoed in the wind. Every act, from planting a seed to debating philosophy, became proof of life's audacity. 50 million souls had transformed isolation into resonance, scarcity into possibility, and neglect into legacy. The galaxy witnessed, humbled and silent, as humanity radiated a force beyond calculation, beyond expectation, beyond erasure. Humanity did not bend to cold calculation. It bent reality itself. The abandoned worlds, once dismissed, had become the beating heart of the galaxy, a pulse of resilience, empathy, and audacity that no empire, no algorithm, no prediction could contain. Civilization flowed outward not as trade, not as conquest, but as an undying echo of what it meant to endure, to create, and to be human. The lesson was eternal, inscribed in stone, wind, fire, and song. Where others saw inefficiency, humanity had built a universe of possibility, and the stars themselves bent to witness the brilliance of lives lived fully, defiantly, and beautifully against the indifferent vastness of space.